Lieutenant Sarah Chun had always prided herself on being exactly where she was supposed to be. At 26, she maintained a perfect attendance record, arrived 15 minutes early to every appointment, and had never once gotten lost on a military base, which made the morning of October 15th all the more ironic. The Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Coronado, California, buzzed with its usual pre-dawn energy. Sarah clutched her transfer papers as she navigated the maze of identical corridors, searching for conference room 247B. She had been reassigned from her comfortable desk job in naval intelligence to what her commanding officer had vaguely described as special operations support. The details remained frustratingly unclear, but Sarah had learned not to question orders. The hallways stretched endlessly, each door marked with cryptic numbers and letters that seemed to shift meaning with every turn. Sarah checked her watch for the third time in 2 minutes. She was cutting it close, and being late to her first day would not make the impression she wanted. A bead of sweat formed on her forehead, despite the air conditioning that kept the building at a constant 68 degrees. Finally, she spotted a door marked 247. The small placard next to it read something about command briefing, but Sarah couldn't make out the rest through the scratched plastic cover. Close enough, she decided. She took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and knocked twice before entering. The room fell silent the moment she stepped through the door. 12 of the most intimidating men Sarah had ever seen sat around a polished mahogany conference table. Their faces bore the weathered marks of countless missions, scars that told stories of battles fought in places most people couldn't pronounce. Each man wore the distinctive trident pin of the Navy SEALs, and their combined presence filled the room with an intensity that made Sarah's heart race. At the head of the table sat a man who looked like he could bench press a small car. His nameplate read Commander Jackson, and his expression suggested he was not pleased with the interruption. "Gentlemen," Commander Jackson said without taking his eyes off Sarah, "I believe we have our new commanding officer." Sarah opened her mouth to correct the obvious mistake, but before she could speak, the 12 men rose in perfect unison. The sound of their chairs scraping against the floor created an ominous symphony that echoed off the concrete walls. "Welcome, Commander Chun," said a voice from the back of the room. Sarah turned to see a man approaching with what appeared to be a ceremonial spray bottle. His name tag read Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, and he wore the kind of smile that suggested he knew something she didn't. "Wait, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sarah began, but her words were lost as Rodriguez aimed a spray bottle in her direction. The liquid hit her square in the chest, soaking through her uniform shirt, and leaving a distinct smell of salt water and something else she couldn't identify. The room erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "Congratulations, Mom," Rodriguez shouted over the noise. "You've been properly initiated into SEAL Team Command." Sarah stood there dripping, her carefully pressed uniform now clinging to her body like a second skin. The liquid continued to drip onto the polished floor, creating a small puddle at her feet. She looked around the room at the faces of the men who were now saluting her with enthusiasm that bordered on reverence. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person," Sarah finally managed to say, her voice barely audible over the continued celebration. Commander Jackson approached her with a folder thick enough to be a small book. "Commander Chun, your reputation precedes you. The Pentagon has briefed us extensively on your background. MIT graduate, fluent in 7 languages, expert in cyber warfare and strategic planning. Youngest person ever to achieve a perfect score on the Advanced Military Leadership Assessment." Sarah felt the color drain from her face. While the accomplishments were accurate, she had no idea how they related to commanding Navy SEALs. Her expertise lay in analyzing data and writing reports, not leading elite soldiers into combat. "Sir, I was supposed to report to conference room 247B for a support position," she said, holding up her soggy transfer papers. Jackson glanced at the papers, then at the door, then back at her. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Commander, you're in conference room 247A. This is the SEAL Team Command Briefing Room." 247B is the janitor's closet. The laughter that followed was not unkind, but it was loud enough to be heard 3 floors down. Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but before she could excuse herself and flee to the relative safety of the janitor's closet, Jackson placed a firm hand on her shoulder. However, he continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, the Pentagon did send specific orders regarding your assignment. Orders that came directly from Admiral Morrison himself. Sarah knew that name. Admiral Morrison was not someone whose orders could be questioned or ignored. He was the kind of man who could end careers with a phone call and had enough political connections to make problems disappear permanently. Jackson handed her the folder. Your orders, Commander. You are hereby assigned as the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 1, effective immediately. All SEAL teams on the West Coast now fall under your operational command. The room spun slightly as Sarah processed this information. She commanded a budget analysis department of 4 people back at Naval Intelligence. Now she was apparently in charge of several hundred of the most elite warriors in the world. Sir, I don't understand. My background is in intelligence analysis, not special operations. I've never led combat troops. I've never even been in combat, Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly on the last word. Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, still holding the spray bottle. Ma'am, with respect, that might be exactly what we need. The teams have been operating under the same old-school mentality for decades. Maybe it's time for someone with a fresh perspective, someone who thinks differently. The other SEALs nodded in agreement, though Sarah couldn't tell if they were being sincere or simply following Rodriguez's lead. Their faces remained professionally neutral, but she caught a few exchanging glances that suggested internal conversations were taking place without words. The spray, Sarah asked, looking down at her soaked uniform. What was that about? Rodriguez grinned. Old tradition, ma'am. Every new commander gets baptized with water from the Pacific Ocean mixed with sand from every beach where SEALs have operated. It's supposed to give you the wisdom of all the missions that came before. Sarah touched her shirt, feeling the grit of sand between her fingers. The tradition sounded both meaningful and completely made up on the spot, but she wasn't about to challenge it in front of 12 men who could probably take down a small building with their bare hands. Commander, Jackson said, consulting his watch, we have a situation briefing in 30 minutes. 3 of our teams are currently deployed, and Team 7 is scheduled to ship out tomorrow morning for a classified operation in the South China Sea. They'll need final approval from their commanding officer before departure. The weight of real responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a lead blanket. These weren't theoretical scenarios from her intelligence training. Real people would be going into real danger based on decisions she would have to make. The irony wasn't lost on her that her first command decision would involve approving a mission she knew nothing about, in a place she'd only seen on maps. I need to review the mission parameters, she said, trying to inject authority into her voice. Of course, ma'am. Chief Rodriguez will brief you on current operations and get you up to speed on team capabilities. We've also arranged for accelerated training in Special Operations Command protocols. You'll need to be fully operational within 72 hours. 72 hours to learn how to command elite soldiers. Sarah had taken longer than that to learn how to parallel park. But as she looked around the room at the faces of the men who were now technically under her command, she saw something unexpected. Instead of doubt or resentment, she saw curiosity. These battle-hardened warriors were genuinely interested to see what she would bring to their world. Gentlemen, Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice, I know this is unusual. I know I'm not what any of you expected. But I'm here, and apparently I'm in charge, so we're going to make this work. I'll learn everything I can about your operations, your capabilities, and your needs. In return, I expect your honesty, your expertise, and your patience while I get up to speed. The SEALs exchanged more glances, but this time Sarah saw approval in their expressions. Rodriguez actually smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. Ma'am, said a voice from the back of the room, we've had commanders who thought they knew everything before they even walked through the door. It's refreshing to have someone who admits what they don't know. Sarah turned toward the speaker, a compact man with intelligent eyes, and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. His nameplate identified him as Petty Officer Thompson. "Thank you, Thompson. I believe honesty will serve us better than false confidence," Sarah replied. Commander Jackson cleared his throat. "If we're done with introductions, ma'am, we should begin your situational briefing. The clock is ticking, and Team 7 needs to know if their mission is a go." Sarah nodded, feeling the first stirrings of determination replacing her initial panic. She had stumbled into this situation through a combination of bureaucratic confusion and bad navigation, but she was here now. The men in this room were counting on her to make smart decisions that would keep them alive and help them complete their mission successfully. As the group began filing out of the conference room toward what Sarah assumed was a briefing area, Rodriguez fell in a step beside her. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what were you expecting to find in conference room 247B? Sarah managed a small laugh. "Honestly, a desk job analyzing shipping manifests and communication intercepts. Something quiet and predictable." Rodriguez chuckled. "Well, ma'am, I think it's safe to say your quiet days are officially over." Looking back, Sarah would remember this moment as the last time she felt like her old self. The woman who walked into that room by mistake was gone forever. In her place stood someone who would have to grow into a role she never sought, commanding respect from men who had earned theirs through blood and sacrifice. The spray-soaked uniform would dry, but the responsibility that came with it would only grow heavier with each passing day. As they walked down the hallway toward her new life, Sarah caught a glimpse of conference room 247B. Through the small window in the door, she could see mops, cleaning supplies, and a single folding chair. It looked peaceful and simple, everything her life was about to stop being. The irony struck her again. She had spent her entire military career being exactly where she was supposed to be, following orders, staying in her lane, and avoiding complications. Now, the most important assignment of her life had started with her being in completely the wrong place. Perhaps, she thought, that was exactly where she needed to be. The briefing room looked like something from a science fiction movie. Multiple screens displayed satellite imagery, weather patterns, and intelligence reports from around the globe. Sarah sat at the head of a U-shaped table, still wearing her damp uniform, as Chief Rodriguez began what he called her crash course in reality. Team 7 consists of 8 men, Rodriguez explained, pointing to photographs displayed on the main screen. There are maritime specialists, trained for underwater demolition, shipboarding, and coastal reconnaissance. Their current mission involves intercepting a cargo vessel suspected of transporting weapons to terrorist organizations in Southeast Asia. Sarah studied the faces on the screen. Each man looked capable of handling whatever dangers awaited them. But she also noticed something else in their expressions. These weren't the faces of mindless soldiers following orders. These were thinking professionals who analyzed situations and made split-second decisions that could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. The target vessel is the MV Shanghai Express, Rodriguez continued, switching to a satellite image of a massive cargo ship cutting through dark waters. Intelligence suggests it's carrying more than just commercial goods. Our sources indicate the presence of surface-to-air missiles, explosives, and possibly chemical weapons. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The intelligence reports she had analyzed in her previous position dealt with theoretical threats and statistical probabilities. This was different. Real people would board that ship based on information that might be incomplete or even wrong. "What's the confidence level on the intelligence?" she asked. Commander Jackson, who had been quietly observing from the side of the room, stepped forward. 60%, ma'am. High enough to justify the mission, but low enough to make it dangerous. 60%. Sarah had worked with statistical models her entire career, and she knew that 40% uncertainty could mean anything from minor inaccuracies to complete mission failure. But she also understood that in the world of special operations, waiting for perfect intelligence often meant losing the opportunity entirely. "Show me the boarding plan," she said. The screen changed to display a detailed schematic of the cargo vessel. Rodriguez used a laser pointer to trace the proposed route. Team 7 will approach in 2 rigid inflatable boats under cover of darkness. Alpha Team will board at the stern, while Bravo Team secures the bridge. The operation is designed to be quick and quiet, with the crew secured before they can send a distress signal or dump evidence overboard. Sarah studied the plan, noting the precise timing required for each phase. Everything depended on perfect coordination and flawless execution. One mistake could result in a diplomatic incident or, worse, the loss of American lives. "What's the backup plan if things go wrong?" she asked. Rodriguez and Jackson exchanged glances. "Ma'am, in special operations, the backup plan is usually to improvise and adapt. Our teams are trained to handle unexpected situations." The answer bothered Sarah more than she wanted to admit. Her background in intelligence analysis had taught her to plan for multiple contingencies, to model various failure scenarios, and to have detailed responses ready for each possibility. The idea of improvise and adapt felt dangerously unprepared. "I want additional contingency planning," she said. "What happens if the ship changes course? What if there are more crew members than expected? What if the cargo is more dangerous than anticipated?" The room fell silent. Sarah could feel the weight of multiple stares, but she pressed on. "I'm not questioning the team's ability to adapt under pressure. I'm asking for more comprehensive planning so they don't have to rely solely on adaptation." Commander Jackson nodded slowly. "Ma'am, traditional SEAL planning focuses on mission flexibility rather than rigid contingency protocols. Our team's trained to handle uncertainty, and that training is valuable," Sarah replied. "But uncertainty can be reduced through better planning. Give me 30 minutes to review the intelligence package and the mission parameters. I want to run some scenarios." Rodriguez looked skeptical. "Ma'am, with respect, Team 7 ships out in 18 hours. We don't have time for extensive analysis." Sarah stood, feeling the sand from her earlier initiation grinding between her uniform and her skin. "Chief, I'm not asking for extensive analysis. I'm asking for smart analysis. 30 minutes. As the room cleared, Sarah found herself alone with stacks of classified documents and multiple computer screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds. The weight of command settled more heavily on her shoulders with each page she read. The intelligence on the Shanghai Express came from 3 sources: satellite imagery showing suspicious loading patterns, intercepted communications mentioning weapon shipments, and a single human asset who claimed to have seen missile components being loaded in a Chinese port. Sarah had worked with similar intelligence before, but never with the knowledge that real people would act on her assessment. She began building what her MIT professors had called a decision tree, mapping out various scenarios and their probable outcomes. The process was methodical and calming, transforming uncertainty into manageable variables. 25 minutes later, she had identified 7 potential complications that the original mission plan didn't address. More importantly, she had developed responses for each one. When Rodriguez and Jackson returned, Sarah had filled 3 whiteboards with diagrams, probability calculations, and tactical modifications. "Gentlemen," she said, "I approve the mission, but with modifications." She turned to the first whiteboard. "The current plan assumes the Shanghai Express maintains its present course and speed. But if the crew suspects they're being watched, they might divert to international waters where interdiction becomes legally complicated. I recommend positioning a backup vessel to block potential escape routes." Rodriguez frowned. "Ma'am, that would require additional resources and coordination with other naval units." "Which is why I've already contacted the USS Columbia," Sarah replied. "They're conducting training exercises in the area and can provide support without compromising operational security." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You contacted another ship?" "I contacted their intelligence officer, someone I worked with previously. The Columbia can position themselves as a routine patrol, maintaining plausible deniability while providing backup if needed." Sarah moved to the second whiteboard. "The plan also assumes the cargo ship has a standard crew complement. But intelligence suggests the presence of armed guards, which could turn a quiet boarding into an active firefight. I recommend additional surveillance to get an accurate count of personnel before the teams commit to boarding." "How do you propose we do that?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah pointed to a series of numbers on the board. "The Shanghai Express will pass through a shipping channel monitored by automated traffic control. I can access those systems, and Use thermal imaging to get an accurate count of people on board. We'll know exactly what the teams are facing before they get within miles of the target. For the first time since entering the room, Sarah saw genuine respect in the eyes of the two senior officers. Her suggestions weren't just theoretical. They were practical improvements that could save lives. The third modification involves extraction procedures, she continued. The current plan has the teams returning to their original pickup point, but that assumes the mission goes exactly according to schedule. I've arranged for multiple extraction options, including helicopter support if the teams need to leave quickly. Rodriguez was now taking notes, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional interest. Ma'am, these modifications are solid, but they require coordination with multiple units and agencies. That's going to raise questions. Sarah smiled for the first time since being sprayed with ocean water. Chief, one advantage of accidentally becoming a commander is that I still have contacts throughout the intelligence community. People who owe me favors and trust my judgment. I've already made the necessary calls. Jackson stared at the white bars, studying Sarah's calculations and tactical modifications. Commander Chun, how long did you say you've been in the military? 8 years, sir, but all in intelligence analysis. And you've never commanded operational units? No, sir, unless you count my 4-person analysis team. Jackson shook his head slowly. Ma'am, I've been in special operations for 22 years. What you've done in 30 minutes would typically take a planning committee days to develop. And your modifications address vulnerabilities that most combat commanders wouldn't even consider. Sarah felt a flush of pride, but also a growing sense of responsibility. These weren't just theoretical exercises anymore. Real people would follow these plans into real danger. Sir, there's one more thing, she said, turning to the third whiteboard. I want real-time communication with Team 7 during the operation. Not just check-ins, but continuous monitoring. If something goes wrong, I want to know immediately so I can coordinate support. Rodriguez looked concerned. Ma'am, that's not standard protocol. Mission commanders typically maintain radio silence to avoid compromising operational security. Chief, I understand the security concerns, but I also understand the value of real-time information. I'll be monitoring intelligence feeds, weather patterns, and shipping traffic throughout the operation. If I see something the team doesn't, I want to be able to warn them. The two men exchanged glances again, but this time Sarah sensed acceptance rather than doubt. Very well, Commander, Jackson said. I'll brief Team 7 on the modifications. They're going to be surprised to learn they have such detailed backup planning. As Jackson left to coordinate the changes, Rodriguez remained behind, studying the white bars with obvious admiration. Ma'am, he said, I have to admit, when you walked through that door this morning, I figured we were getting another desk jockey who would rubber stamp operations without understanding them. I was wrong. Sarah wiped a small amount of dried sand from her sleeve. Chief, I may not have combat experience, but I understand the value of good planning. These men are putting their lives on the line. The least I can do is make sure they have every possible advantage. Rodriguez nodded. Ma'am, I think you're going to fit in here better than any of us expected. But I have to ask, what made you think of all these modifications so quickly? Sarah considered the question. In intelligence analysis, you learn to look for what's missing rather than just what's present. Every plan has gaps. Every operation has vulnerabilities. My job has always been to find those gaps before they become problems. And now my job is to make sure those gaps don't get people killed. As Rodriguez left to implement the mission modifications, Sarah remained alone in the briefing room, surrounded by screens displaying real-time intelligence from around the world. For the first time since walking through the wrong door, she felt like she might actually be qualified for this position. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years analyzing operations conducted by people like the SEALs she now commanded, but she had never considered how her analytical skills might improve those operations. Her mistake in finding the wrong conference room had apparently put her exactly where her unique abilities could make the most difference. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her former commanding officer. Chun, heard about your new assignment. Sure you didn't volunteer for this? Sarah looked around the room, filled with plans for dangerous operations, at the screens showing ships and weather patterns that could determine whether 8 men came home safely, at the responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders through pure chance. She typed back, "No, sir, I definitely didn't volunteer. But I think I'm going to stay." Outside the window, she could see the Pacific Ocean stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, the Shanghai Express continued its journey, unaware that its routine cargo run was about to become the first real test of Sarah Chen's accidental command. In 18 hours, she would learn whether her careful planning and analytical approach could successfully guide elite warriors through the chaos of real combat. The spray from her initiation had long since dried, but the responsibility it represented was just beginning to sink in. Sarah Chun had walked through the wrong door and found herself exactly where she was needed most. Now she had to prove that being in the right place, even by accident, was only the beginning of effective leadership. The operations center at 0200 hours felt like the bridge of a spacecraft. Multiple screens cast blue and green light across the faces of technicians monitoring communications, weather patterns, and satellite feeds from across the Pacific. Sarah sat at the central command station, wearing a fresh uniform and a headset that connected her directly to Team 7. Phoenix Base, this is Trident 7, came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, Team 7's leader. "We are 2 miles from target and beginning final approach." Sarah's voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Copy, Trident 7. Weather conditions remain favorable and target vessel maintains heading and speed. Thermal imaging confirms 12 personnel on board, consistent with crew manifest plus 2 additional bodies." Beside her, Chief Rodriguez monitored radio frequencies while Commander Jackson tracked the positions of nearby vessels. The backup plan Sarah had insisted on was already proving valuable. The USS Columbia had positioned itself 20 nautical miles away, ready to provide support without appearing connected to the operation. "Phoenix Base, we have visual on target," Webb reported. "Shanghai Express is running with minimal lighting, but we can see activity on the stern deck. Looks like someone's working late." Sarah switched to a different screen, showing the real-time satellite feed of the cargo ship. Even from hundreds of miles above, she could see the heat signatures of people moving around the vessel's deck. "Trident 7, be advised that 2 of the heat signatures are positioned near what appears to be covered equipment on the port side. Could be guards or crew working on concealed cargo." "Copy, Phoenix Base. Alpha Team will adjust approach to avoid that area." The next 30 minutes passed in controlled tension. Sarah watched the feeds while Team 7 maneuvered their rigid inflatable boats through the dark waters of the South China Sea. The thermal imaging showed the team's precise movements as they approached the massive cargo ship from 2 different angles. "Phoenix Base, Alpha Team is in position at the stern," Webb whispered into his radio. "Bravo Team, report status." "Bravo Team in position at the bridge level," came the reply from Petty Officer First Class David Kim. "Ready to execute on your signal." Sarah's screens displayed the precise positions of all team members. Years of analyzing similar operations had prepared her for this moment, but watching it unfold in real time with people under her command felt entirely different. These weren't dots on a map or entries in a database. These were real people whose safety depended on her decisions. "Trident 7, you are cleared to execute," Sarah said into her headset. The operation unfolded with mechanical precision. Alpha Team secured the stern while Bravo Team took control of the bridge, cutting off the crew's ability to communicate with the outside world. The thermal imaging showed the systematic clearing of each deck as the SEALs moved through the ship like shadows. "Phoenix Base, we have control of the bridge and engine room," Webb reported. "Crew secured with no resistance. Beginning search for cargo." Sarah felt her first moment of relief, but it was short-lived. One of the technicians monitoring communication frequencies suddenly looked up with concern. "Commander, I'm picking up an encrypted transmission from the Shanghai Express. Someone on board managed to send a burst communication before we cut them off." Sarah's blood chilled. A compromised operation could escalate quickly, especially in international waters with Chinese naval forces operating in the region. "Can you determine the recipient or content?" she asked. "Negative, ma'am. It was a short burst, maybe 5 seconds, heavily encrypted. Could have been a distress signal or a warning to other vessels." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If the message was a distress call, They might have minutes before other ships or aircraft arrived. If it was a warning about the cargo, other vessels in the smuggling network might start dumping evidence or changing course. Trident 7. Be advised that the target vessel sent a communication before you secure the bridge. Unknown recipient and content. We may have company soon. Webb's voice remained calm. Copy, Phoenix Base. We'll accelerate the search. Alpha Team found the concealed cargo you identified. Definite weapons crates, but something else too. Stand by. Sarah switched between satellite feeds, searching for approaching vessels or aircraft. The South China Sea was always busy with commercial traffic, but she needed to identify any ships that might be responding to the distress call. Commander, called Rodriguez, I'm tracking 3 vessels that changed course in the last 10 minutes. 2 cargo ships and what looks like a Chinese patrol boat. They're all heading in the general direction of the Shanghai Express. The situation was deteriorating quickly. Sarah had planned for various contingencies, but a compromised operation with potential enemy response required immediate decisions. Trident 7, you need to expedite. We have multiple vessels converging on your position. What's your status on cargo assessment? Phoenix Base, you need to see this. We found the weapons, but there's something else. Industrial equipment, looks like chemical processing gear. And the manifest lists this stuff as medical supplies bound for humanitarian organizations. Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Chemical processing equipment disguised as medical supplies could mean only one thing. Someone was manufacturing weapons-grade chemical agents and distributing them under the cover of humanitarian aid. Can you confirm the equipment type? She asked. Negative, Phoenix Base. We need a specialist to identify this gear properly. But it doesn't look like any medical equipment I've ever seen. Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for weeks afterward. Trident 7. Document everything you can and prepare for extraction. The approaching vessels are closing your position too quickly for extended investigation. Ma'am, Rodriguez said quietly, the Chinese patrol boat is increasing speed. They'll be in visual range of the Shanghai Express in 40 minutes. Trident 7. Extract immediately. Collect all possible documentation and photo evidence, but get off that ship now. Copy, Phoenix Base. Alpha Team is collecting samples and documents. Bravo Team is preparing extraction. Sarah watched the thermal imaging as Team 7 moved quickly through the ship, gathering evidence while preparing to leave. The precision and speed of their movements impressed her, but she could also sense the urgency in their actions. Phoenix Base, this is Columbia Actual, came a new voice on Sarah's headset. We're monitoring the Chinese patrol boat. They've launched a helicopter and increased to flank speed. Recommend immediate extraction of your personnel. The USS Columbia had been monitoring the situation from their distant position, ready to provide support if needed. Their confirmation of the approaching Chinese forces added weight to Sarah's decision to abort the detailed investigation. Trident 7. Columbia confirms inbound Chinese forces. Extract now. Copy, Phoenix Base. Teams are off the target and moving to extraction point Alpha. Sarah's screens showed the heat signatures of Team 7's boats moving away from the Shanghai Express at high speed. But they weren't clear yet. The approaching Chinese forces could still intercept them if they maintained their current course. Trident 7. Divert to extraction point Bravo. Your current route will put you in the path of the approaching patrol boat. Copy, Phoenix Base. Adjusting course to Bravo. Sarah had identified 3 potential extraction points during her mission planning, anticipating exactly this type of complication. Extraction point Bravo would take Team 7 further from their original pickup, but it would also keep them clear of the Chinese forces. Commander, said one of the technicians, the Chinese helicopter is conducting a search pattern around the Shanghai Express. They're definitely responding to that distress call. Time to extraction? Sarah asked. 40 minutes to extraction point Bravo, ma'am. 40 minutes of maintaining radio silence while Chinese forces searched the area. Sarah found herself holding her breath as she watched the satellite feeds, tracking the movements of both her teams and the potential threats. Phoenix Base, this is Trident 7. We are clear of immediate threats and proceeding to Bravo. Cargo assessment confirms weapons shipment and unidentified industrial equipment. documentation, and samples secured. Sarah felt her shoulders relax for the first time in 2 hours. Copy. Trine 7. Well done. Proceed to extraction and maintain communication security. As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah began processing what Team 7 had discovered. Weapons smuggling was serious enough, but chemical processing equipment suggested something far more dangerous. The implications could reach beyond simple arms trafficking into the realm of weapons of mass destruction. Commander, Rodriguez said, Team 7 will be back in 3 hours. How do you want to handle the intelligence they collected? Sarah considered the options. The evidence Team 7 had gathered could expose a major international smuggling operation, but it could also create diplomatic complications with China and other nations. The chemical processing equipment was particularly concerning, requiring expert analysis to determine its intended purpose. I want a full debrief as soon as they return, she said. And I want experts from chemical and biological defense standing by to analyze anything they brought back. This could be bigger than a simple weapons shipment. Jackson nodded approvingly. Ma'am, you handled that well. The decision to modify the extraction when the situation changed probably saved the mission and kept the team safe. Sarah looked at the screens, still displaying the movements of Chinese forces around the Shanghai Express. Sir, I made the decisions I could based on available information. But I can't help thinking we left evidence behind that could have told us more about this operation. Commander, in special operations, you rarely get complete information. You make the best decisions you can with what you have, and you live with the results. Tonight, 8 men are coming home safely with actionable intelligence. That's a successful mission by any standard. As Sarah watched the satellite feed showing Team 7's boats moving steadily toward their extraction point, she felt a mixture of relief and responsibility. Her first operational command had been successful, but it had also revealed threats that extended far beyond the scope of a simple weapons interdiction. The chemical processing equipment bothered her most. In her years of intelligence analysis, she had seen enough classified reports to know that such equipment could be used to manufacture chemical weapons, biological agents, or industrial toxins. The fact that it was hidden among weapons and disguised as medical supplies suggested a level of sophistication that pointed to state-sponsored terrorism or international organized crime. Chief, she said to Rodriguez, I want continuous monitoring of shipping traffic in this region. If the Shanghai Express was part of a larger network, there might be other vessels carrying similar cargo. Already on it, ma'am. I've tasked our intelligence assets to track any ships with similar routing or manifests. Sarah nodded, but her mind was already moving to the next challenge. The success of tonight's operation had established her credibility with the SEALs under her command, but it had also revealed threats that would require careful handling. The evidence Team 7 had collected could prevent attacks and save lives, but it could also create international incidents if mishandled. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from Admiral Morrison. Chun, heard about tonight's operation. Preliminary reports look good. Need full briefing at 0800. Well done. Sarah looked around the operations center at the technicians and officers who had supported the mission. In 12 hours, she had gone from mistaken room assignment to successfully commanding her first special operations mission. The irony struck her again. Walking through the wrong door had put her exactly where her skills were most needed. Commander, Rodriguez said, Team 7 is reporting successful extraction. All personnel safe and accounted for. Evidence secured and en route for analysis. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Thank you, Chief. Let's start preparing for the debrief. I have a feeling tonight's operation is just the beginning of something much larger. As the sun began to rise over the Pacific, casting orange light through the windows of the operations center, Sarah Chun realized that her accidental command had become something real. She was no longer the intelligence analyst who had stumbled into the wrong room. She was a commander who had successfully led her first mission, and the weight of that responsibility would shape every decision she made from this moment forward. The debriefing room felt different now that Sarah had earned her place in it. The same 12 SEALs who had saluted her with skepticism 3 days earlier now looked at her with genuine respect. Team 7 sat around the conference table, their gear still showing salt stains from the South China Sea, while Sarah reviewed the evidence they had risked their lives to collect. The chemical processing equipment is definitely not medical, said Dr. Elena Vasquez, the chemical and biological defense expert who had flown in from Fort Detrick. This is industrial-grade apparatus designed for synthesizing complex organic compounds. In the wrong hands, it could produce everything from industrial toxins to biological weapon precursors. Sarah studied the photographs Team 7 had taken aboard the Shanghai Express. The equipment looked innocuous enough, stainless steel containers, and complex piping that could have been from any chemical plant. But Dr. Vasquez's analysis painted a darker picture. Doctor, what kind of production capacity are we talking about? Sarah asked. Based on the equipment configuration, they could produce significant quantities of chemical agents, enough to contaminate water supplies for major cities or create weaponized compounds for multiple terrorist attacks. Lieutenant Commander Webb leaned forward. Ma'am, there's something else. The documentation we recovered shows this equipment was bound for 3 different destinations: Manila, Jakarta, and Singapore. If there are similar shipments heading to all those locations, Sarah felt the implications settling like a weight in her chest. We're not looking at a single weapons shipment. We're looking at the infrastructure for a distributed chemical weapons program. Chief Rodriguez had been quietly reviewing shipping manifests on his tablet. Commander, I've been tracking cargo movements based on the documentation Team 7 recovered. In the last 6 months, at least 12 ships with similar manifests have passed through this region, all carrying medical equipment to humanitarian organizations that don't exist. The scope of the operation was becoming clear, and it was far larger than anyone had anticipated. Sarah had stumbled into commanding a simple weapons interdiction that had uncovered an international network for distributing chemical weapons manufacturing equipment. Dr. Vasquez, Sarah said, how quickly could someone with the right knowledge turn this equipment into a functional production facility? With proper expertise, maybe 2 weeks. The equipment we've seen is sophisticated, but it's also modular. Someone clearly designed this system for rapid deployment and assembly. Admiral Morrison entered the briefing room without ceremony, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone present. Sarah had dealt with Morrison through official channels for years, but this was her first face-to-face meeting since her accidental appointment. Commander Chun, Morrison said, taking a seat at the head of the table, your preliminary report makes for disturbing reading. How confident are we in this assessment? Sir, the evidence is solid. Team 7's documentation, combined with Dr. Vasquez's analysis and Chief Rodriguez's pattern recognition, points to a sophisticated international operation. This isn't random weapons smuggling. This is someone building a distributed network for chemical weapons production. Morrison reviewed the photographs and documents spread across the table. Who do we think is behind this? Sarah had been dreading this question because the answer led to uncomfortable implications. Sir, the level of sophistication suggests state sponsorship or involvement by international organized crime with significant resources. The shipping routes, false documentation, and equipment sourcing all point to an organization with global reach and government-level connections. Meaning we could be dealing with a foreign intelligence service, Morrison said. Yes, sir. Or a non-state actor with access to state-level resources and protection. Morrison studied the satellite images of the Shanghai Express encounter. Commander, your handling of this operation has been exemplary. You've uncovered what could be one of the most significant threats to regional security in decades. But that creates a problem. Sarah sensed the weight behind Morrison's words. Sir, this level of threat requires coordination with multiple agencies, international partners, and political leadership. It also requires commanders with experience managing complex, politically sensitive operations. You've done outstanding work, but Sarah felt her heart sink. Morrison was about to remove her from the operation she had discovered and successfully managed. The accidental commander, who had proven herself capable, was about to be replaced by someone with more traditional credentials. Sir, interrupted Lieutenant Commander Webb. With respect, Commander Chin's approach to this operation has been exactly what we needed. Her analytical background let her see patterns and connections that might have been missed by conventional operational thinking. Chief Rodriguez nodded emphatically. Admiral, the mission modifications Commander Chun implemented probably saved lives and definitely improved the intelligence we collected. She thinks differently than traditional commanders, and that's been an asset, not a liability. Morrison looked around the table at the faces of the SEALs, reading something in their expressions that seemed to surprise him. You're telling me you want to keep an inexperienced commander on the most complex operation any of you have ever faced? Sir, said Petty Officer Thompson, the man with the scar who had spoken up during Sarah's first day, Commander Chun may be inexperienced, but she's not incompetent. She listens to expertise, plans thoroughly, and makes smart decisions under pressure. That's everything we need in a commander. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the men who were defending her position, but she also understood Morrison's concerns. Admiral, I appreciate the confidence these men have shown in me, but I also understand the complexity of what we're facing. If you need someone with more experience to manage this operation. Commander Chun, Morrison interrupted, I've been in the Navy for 32 years. I've seen promising officers destroyed by assignments they weren't ready for, and I've seen mediocre officers elevated beyond their capabilities. But I've also seen exceptional people rise to meet extraordinary challenges. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the Pacific. Your accidental assignment to this command has been the subject of considerable discussion at the Pentagon. Some people think it was a bureaucratic mistake that should be quietly corrected. Others think it might have been the right person in the right place at exactly the right time. Sarah remained silent, sensing that Morrison was working through a decision that would determine her future and potentially the success of the operation they had uncovered. The evidence you've collected has already been briefed to the Joint Chiefs and the National Security Council, Morrison continued. The consensus is that this operation represents a clear and present danger to American interests and regional security. The question is how to proceed. He turned back to face the group. Commander Chun, I'm offering you a choice. You can return to your original assignment in naval intelligence, where you'll continue to analyze this operation from a safe distance while more experienced commanders handle the operational aspects. Or you can stay in command of this investigation, with full support from the Pentagon and coordination with other agencies. Sarah felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her. The safe choice was obvious. Return to the comfortable world of analysis and reports where decisions were theoretical and consequences were statistical. The dangerous choice was to continue commanding real operations with real people whose lives depended on her decisions. Sir, if I stay in command, what exactly am I commanding? Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the room. Commander, you'll be leading a joint task force with resources from Naval Special Warfare, intelligence, and coordination with international partners. Your mission will be to identify, track, and neutralize this chemical weapons distribution network before it becomes operational. How many people are we talking about? Initially, 50 personnel from various specialties. That number could grow significantly depending on what you discover. You'll have authority to task intelligence assets, coordinate with other services, and request whatever support you need. Sarah looked around the table at the SEALs who had become her first real command. These men had accepted her despite her unconventional background and defended her competence to the highest levels of the military. Now she had the opportunity to lead a much larger operation against a threat she had helped uncover. Admiral, I'll need continued access to Dr. Vasquez and other technical experts. This operation requires capabilities I don't have. Done. I'll need real-time intelligence sharing with our international partners, especially in Southeast Asia, where most of this activity seems to be concentrated. Already being arranged. And I'll need assurance that the people under my command will receive full support regardless of how politically complicated this operation becomes. Morrison nodded approvingly. Commander, you're asking for exactly the right things. Your focus on protecting your people and ensuring adequate resources tells me everything I need to know about your fitness for command. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Sir, I accept continued command of this operation. The room erupted in restrained, but genuine approval from SEALs. Chief Rodriguez actually smiled, while Lieutenant Commander Webb nodded with obvious satisfaction. Excellent, Morrison said. Your new task force will be designated Joint Task Force Pacific Shield. You'll report directly to me, with coordination through the National Security Council for any operations that cross international boundaries. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis. Commander, there's something else you need to know about this equipment. The specific configuration suggests it was designed by someone with advanced knowledge of chemical weapons production. This isn't improvised terrorism. This is professional-grade capability development. Sarah felt a chill as the implications sank in. Doctor, are you saying this equipment was designed by experts? Possibly government experts. The level of sophistication suggests access to classified information about chemical weapons design and production. Someone with security clearances and advanced technical knowledge created these specifications. Morrison's expression darkened. Commander Chun, you may be dealing with more than international terrorists. You could be facing a rogue operation involving people with access to highly classified information. As the briefing continued, Sarah realized that her accidental command had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The simple weapons interdiction that had started her operational career had uncovered a threat that potentially reached into the highest levels of government and international intelligence services. Sir, she said to Morrison, I'll need to expand the investigation beyond the shipping network. If this operation involves people with security clearances, we need to examine how they gained access to the technical information required to design this equipment. Morrison nodded grimly. Commander, you're learning to think like a real operational commander. Yes, you'll need to investigate the source of the technical knowledge. But be warned that path could lead to very uncomfortable places. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who had become her allies and supporters in just 3 days. The weight of command had grown heavier with each revelation, but so had her confidence in her ability to handle the responsibility. Admiral, I understand the risks, but if we don't follow the investigation wherever it leads, we'll never fully neutralize this threat. People with the knowledge to design chemical weapons production equipment don't just disappear. They either continue to be a threat, or they become assets for other hostile operations. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Commander Chun, 3 days ago you were a naval intelligence analyst who walked into the wrong briefing room. Today you're commanding a joint task force investigating one of the most complex security threats we've faced in years. How do you think you're handling the transition? Sarah considered the question honestly. Sir, I'm terrified most of the time, but I'm also more engaged and effective than I've ever been in my career. I think I was accidentally put exactly where I belong. Morrison stood to leave, but paused at the door. Commander, that spray Chief Rodriguez gave you on your first day? That wasn't really a traditional SEAL initiation ceremony. Sarah looked confused. Sir, Rodriguez grinned sheepishly. Ma'am, I may have improvised that tradition, but it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Morrison laughed, the first truly relaxed expression Sarah had seen from him. Commander Chun, you've been commanding based on made-up traditions, accidental authority, and improvised procedures. And somehow you made it all work. That tells me everything I need to know about your potential as a leader. As Morrison left the briefing room, Sarah realized that her accidental appointment had become something real and permanent. She was no longer the confused analyst who had walked through the wrong door. She was Joint Task Force Pacific Shield Commander, responsible for protecting American interests and regional security against a threat that was growing more complex by the hour. The irony struck her one more time. She had spent her career analyzing operations conducted by others, never imagining that her analytical skills would be exactly what was needed to command those operations herself. Her mistake in finding the wrong conference room had put her exactly where her unique capabilities could make the most difference. Now she just had to prove that being in the right place, even by accident, was enough to stop people who wanted to use chemical weapons against innocent civilians. 6 months after walking through the wrong door, Sarah Chin stood in the same briefing room where her accidental command had begun. But everything else had changed. The walls now displayed intelligence maps covering 3 continents, tracking the movements of what had become known as the Meridian Network, the most sophisticated chemical weapons distribution operation ever discovered. Joint Task Force Pacific Shield had grown to over 200 personnel across 7 countries. Sarah's original team of 12 SEALs had expanded to include intelligence analysts, chemical weapons experts, international liaison officers, and special operations units from allied nations. The woman who had once managed a 4-person analysis team now commanded resources that spanned the globe. "Commander," said Major Lisa Park, the task force intelligence chief, "we've confirmed the identity of the primary technical advisor for the Meridian Network, Dr. James Kellerman, former chief scientist for the Army's Chemical Defense Program. He disappeared from his position at Aberdeen Proving Ground 8 months ago." Sarah studied the photograph of a distinguished-looking man in his 50s. Kellerman had the kind of credentials that could design chemical weapons production systems in his sleep. He also had access to classified information that would make those systems extremely effective. "Do we know why he went rogue?" Sarah asked. "Financial records suggest gambling debts exceeding $2 million, Park replied. "The Meridian Network apparently offered him enough money to solve his problems in exchange for his expertise." Chief Rodriguez, now serving as Sarah's deputy commander, looked up from his tactical display. "Ma'am, we've tracked Kellerman to a facility in Myanmar. Intelligence suggests he's overseeing the assembly of the equipment we've been intercepting. If we can take him alive, we might be able to roll up the entire network." Sarah reviewed the intelligence package on Myanmar facility. Unlike the shipboarding that had started her operational career, this would require a complex international operation involving multiple agencies and significant political coordination. The kind of mission that could succeed brilliantly or fail catastrophically with little middle ground. "What's the facility's defensive posture?" she asked. Lieutenant Commander Webb, now her operations chief, displayed satellite imagery on the main screen. "Heavily guarded compound, approximately 40 armed personnel, sophisticated electronic surveillance, and possible chemical weapon stockpiles. This isn't going to be a quiet infiltration." Sarah had learned that successful command required balancing aggressive action with careful risk assessment. The Myanmar facility represented the best opportunity to capture Kellerman and shut down the Meridian Network, but it also posed the greatest danger to her personnel. "Show me the assault plan," she said. Webb switched to a tactical display showing the proposed operation. "Joint assault with SEAL Teams 7, British SAS, and Australian Special Forces. Helicopter insertion under cover of darkness. Simultaneous assault on 3 objectives: the main laboratory, the administrative building, and the defensive positions." Sarah studied the plan, noting the complexity of coordinating 3 different national units against multiple objectives. Her experience analyzing similar operations told her where the vulnerabilities lay. "What's the extraction plan if things go wrong?" she asked. "Standard procedure, ma'am. Rally points, contingency helicopter support, and overwatch from AC-130 gunships." Sarah frowned. "Standard procedure won't work if Kellerman releases chemical agents as a defensive measure. We need to plan for the possibility that the entire compound becomes contaminated." Dr. Vasquez, now a permanent member of the task force, nodded approvingly. "Commander Chun is right. Kellerman knows we're closing in, and he's demonstrated willingness to use chemical weapons as deterrents. We need chemical protection protocols for all personnel and decontamination procedures for extraction." The planning session continued for 6 hours, with Sarah insisting on contingencies for scenarios that traditional military planning might overlook. Her analytical background had taught her to identify failure modes that seemed unlikely but could be catastrophic. "I want chemical detection equipment deployed before the assault teams enter the compound," she said. "If Kellerman has weaponized any of the chemicals he's been producing, our people need advance warning." Admiral Morrison, who had been observing the planning session, stepped forward. "Commander Chun, you're planning this operation like someone who expects everything to go wrong." Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who would be risking their lives based on her decisions. "Sir, in intelligence analysis, you learn that operations succeed not because everything goes right, but because you've planned for everything that could go wrong. I'd rather over-prepare than lose people to preventable mistakes." Morrison nodded. Your caution has served this task force well, but there comes a time when detailed planning must give way to decisive action. Kellerman isn't going to wait for us to achieve perfect intelligence. Every day we delay, more chemical weapons equipment reaches its intended destinations. Sarah understood the pressure. The Meridian network had been disrupted, but not destroyed. Intelligence suggested that Kellerman was accelerating production timelines, possibly in response to the task force's operations. Waiting for better intelligence might mean losing the opportunity entirely. Sir, I approve the operation, but with full chemical protection protocols and enhanced extraction procedures. The mission is too important to risk losing to preventable casualties. Morrison smiled. Commander, 6 months ago, you were analyzing operations from the safety of an office. Now you're commanding one of the most complex international special operations ever attempted. How do you feel about the responsibility? Sarah considered the question honestly. Sir, I'm still terrified most of the time, but I've learned to use that fear as motivation for better planning. The people in this room trust me to make decisions that keep them alive. That's a responsibility I take very seriously. The operation launched 36 hours later under the code name Meridian Strike. Sarah monitored the assault from the Joint Operations Center, coordinating between American, British, and Australian forces while managing real-time intelligence feeds from multiple satellites and surveillance aircraft. Phoenix Base, this is Trident Leader, came Webb's voice over the secure communications network. We are 5 minutes from target. All teams report ready. Sarah watched the thermal imaging displays showing 3 helicopters approaching the Myanmar compound through the darkness. The chemical detection equipment she had insisted on was already providing data about the facility's atmospheric conditions. Trident Leader, chemical sensors are showing elevated levels of industrial solvents, but nothing immediately dangerous. You are clear to proceed. The assault unfolded with precision that would have impressed Sarah 6 months earlier. But now she watched with the practiced eye of a seasoned commander. Each team hit their objectives simultaneously, overwhelming the compound's defenses before organized resistance could develop. Phoenix Base, Trident 7 has secured the laboratory building. Multiple chemical production units identified, and we have Dr. Kellerman in custody. Repeat, primary objective secured. Sarah felt a surge of relief and satisfaction. The operation she had planned and authorized had achieved its primary goal. But her experience had taught her that successful operations often revealed new complications. Trident Leader, what's the status on the chemical weapons stockpile? Phoenix Base, this is where it gets complicated. We found production equipment and raw materials, but also something else. Documentation suggesting this facility was just one node in a much larger network. Kellerman was coordinating with similar facilities in 3 other countries. Sarah's heart sank. Success in capturing Kellerman had revealed that the Meridian network was even larger and more sophisticated than they had suspected. Instead of ending the operation, Meridian Strike had potentially opened new fronts in the investigation. Trident Leader, secure all documentation and prepare for enhanced extraction. We need everything they've produced at that facility. The extraction proceeded flawlessly, with all personnel returning safely along with Kellerman, extensive documentation, and samples of the chemical production equipment. But as Sarah reviewed the intelligence collected during the operation, she realized that commanding Pacific Shield had been preparation for an even larger challenge. Commander, said Major Park, reviewing the capture documents, the network extends into Europe, Africa, and South America. We're looking at a global operation with dozens of facilities and hundreds of personnel. Admiral Morrison joined the intelligence review, studying the scope of what they had discovered. Commander Chun, Meridian Strike was a complete success, but it's also revealed that your task force has been dealing with just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Sarah looked at the global map displaying suspected Meridian network facilities across multiple continents. The analytical skills that had made her successful as an accidental commander now showed her the full scope of the threat they faced. Sir, we need to expand Pacific Shield into a global operation. This network represents a threat to international security that extends far beyond the Pacific region. Morrison studied the evidence spread across multiple tables and display screens. Commander, what you're proposing would require unprecedented international cooperation and resources. It would also require a commander capable of managing operations across multiple continents simultaneously. Sarah understood what Morrison was suggesting. Sir, I accept the responsibility, but I'll need resources and authority commensurate with the scope of the threat. Commander Chun, you've earned everything you're asking for. Joint Task Force Pacific Shield is being redesignated as Joint Task Force Meridian, with global authority and resources. You'll report directly to the Joint Chiefs, with coordination through allied military commands worldwide. Chief Rodriguez grinned from his position at the intelligence display. Ma'am, remember when your biggest concern was finding the right conference room? Sarah laughed, feeling the weight and satisfaction of command that had grown from accidental beginnings into real expertise. Chief, I remember thinking I was lost. It turns out I was exactly where I needed to be. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis of the chemical samples recovered from Myanmar. Commander, there's something else you need to know. Kellerman's operation was more advanced than we suspected. He wasn't just producing equipment for chemical weapons. He was actually manufacturing weaponized compounds ready for deployment. The implications hit Sarah immediately. Doctor, how much weaponized material are we talking about? Based on the production capacity we observed and the documentation we recovered, potentially enough chemical agents to contaminate water supplies for major metropolitan areas. If there are similar facilities operating in other countries. Sarah felt the familiar weight of command responsibility, but also the confidence that came from successful operations and proven competence. Then we'll find them all and shut them down. That's what Joint Task Force Meridian is going to do. Admiral Morrison prepared to leave the briefing room, but paused to address Sarah directly. Commander Chun, you've grown into this position in ways that continue to surprise everyone, including me. Your accidental appointment has become one of the most successful commands in recent military history. Sarah looked around the briefing room that had become the center of global counterterrorism operations. The walls displayed real-time intelligence from around the world, tracking threats that could affect millions of people. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the satisfaction of knowing that her unique combination of analytical skills and operational command was exactly what was needed. Sir, I may have found this position by accident, but I've learned that sometimes the best commanders are the ones who never plan to command. They focus on the mission and the people rather than their own careers. Morrison nodded approvingly. Commander, that insight alone proves you've earned your position through more than just accidental circumstances. Joint Task Force Meridian is going to need that perspective for the challenges ahead. As the briefing room emptied, Sarah remained behind, studying the global intelligence displays that showed the scope of her new responsibility. The woman who had walked through the wrong door 6 months earlier was gone, replaced by someone who commanded international respect and resources. But the core lesson remained. Effective leadership wasn't about having the perfect credentials or following traditional paths. It was about applying whatever skills you had to the challenges in front of you, listening to expertise, planning thoroughly, and taking care of the people who trusted you with their lives. Sarah Chun had learned to command by accident, but she had proven that being in the right place at the right time, even by mistake, could change the world. Now she just had to make sure that change was for the better. The spray from her first A initiation had long since dried, but the responsibility it represented had grown into something larger than she could have imagined. Joint Task Force Meridian would hunt down the rest of the Meridian network, protect innocent people from chemical weapons attacks, and prove that sometimes the most effective commanders are the ones who never expected to command at all. The wrong door had led to exactly the right place, and Sarah Chun was finally ready to prove she belonged there.